listen to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast with financial planner and retirement specialist Dan Haylett. In this podcast, Dan explores ways to help you overcome the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Join Dan for the journey where he will explore how our wonderful human brain will naturally fight against what it takes to live a happy, healthy and wealthy retirement. Dan will draw on years of expertise, experience and expert guests to solve the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Dan Haylett, and today I am really excited to be joined by founder of Retirement Life Plan and author of the brilliant book by the same name, Pauline Johnson-Zielonka. Polly to her friends, I believe, so I can call you Polly. Polly, welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast.
Hi, thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming on, Polly. Now, it's where are you from? Where are we coming in from today?
I am in Orange County, California at the moment, Surfside, so near Huntington Beach.
Excellent. So, Polly, I'm really excited. It's you're such an amazing guest to have on the show, as I think you're extremely well qualified to talk about our brain's battle with retirement. So just to let the listeners know a bit about you. So you got your PhD in human and organisational systems. You've got a background in industrial psychology. That's kind of psychology in the workplace. And crucially, you've brought together that knowledge and the wisdom and the tools from the fields of positive psychology, social psychology, and that industrial psychology in your approach to understanding that retirement or the retirement transition that we go through. So all of that work has led you to write that brilliant book, Retirement Life Plan, that I referred to, and a link to that will be in the show notes. So I really can't wait to delve into that research, your knowledge and wisdom on the retirement transition. So, but first, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners and your journey and how you've got here.
Yeah, I mean, you summarized it pretty well. I think my career started off in industrial psychology, and I was really interested in well-being in the workplace. I worked with psychometric assessments, which were used for leadership development, team building, recruitment, and generally the goal was to find the right fit between the individual and the job so that you can enhance productivity, but also well-being at the same time. So it's really about finding that right fit. And then during grad school, I was working on my dissertation and I was interviewing people who were in the pre-retirement phase. And I was interviewing them about their retirement experiences. So that's when I realized, wow, this is a major transition for some people. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have thought that much about it. And at the same time, it seemed like there's not a lot of support in this area. There's so much information and research and knowledge around well-being in the workplace. But when it comes to retirement, we kind of assume that it's going to be an easy transition or that people will figure it out, right? You're going to enjoy your time and there's nothing difficult about it. So that's when I began researching the transition a bit more during grad school and also after grad school. And so it was really that research was the basis for the book, as you mentioned.
And one thing I absolutely love about the book, it's got retirement in the title, but there is absolutely no reference to numbers, which I absolutely love. It's a focus on what I believe is some of the most important issues emotionally and behaviourally when it comes to preparing for and living that retirement phase, as you said, that really crucial transition. So what I'm really keen to dig into is, through all of that wonderful research that you've done and all of the reading that you've undertaken to write the book, all of the case studies that you've been through and real life scenarios with people, which I think is truly fascinating. What do you believe are some of these main challenges of this made up thing that us humans have invented that we've come to call retirement?
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the point about money and numbers as well, because that I intentionally have not looked at that. That's not my area of expertise. And there are plenty of people who know so much about that. So my interest was really on the social and psychological side of this. And so aside from numbers, because obviously the financial side of things is really critical and important for people to have figured out. But when we look beyond that, there are different, social and psychological adjustments that people face. And I would say some of the main challenges, just if you're someone starting out thinking about retirement, I'd say one is that there are unexpected adjustments, social, psychological, personal adjustments, however you want to put it. But there's a common assumption that retirement, again, is easy, and we don't really assume that there's just transitional period, and it takes some adjustment to have all of this additional free time. And so I'd say that's the first big challenge, is that people just aren't prepared for retirement to maybe have some bumps along the way. The other piece is that it can be quite emotional, and particularly the retirement event, but the whole thing, really, it can be an emotional experience. And again, because so many of the people around us assume that it's an easy transition, often retirees will feel a bit odd or strange for feeling bad about retirement or not feeling 100% happy about it. They have some mixed emotions, and that seems strange. Why aren't they happy to no longer have to work? Another area of adjustment, I would say, or one of the challenges, is just the identity adjustment. So with all of the time that we spend working, it almost inevitably becomes a part of who we are as an individual. So with retirement, your day-to-day life changes, and that really has an impact on who you are as an individual. The people that you interact with changes. The types of activities you're involved in changes. And, it can either feel kind of abrupt for some people, that you no longer feel like the same person, or it can be more of a gradual transition for others. So it really varies in terms of that identity transition, but that can be one of the bigger challenges for some people. And, that leads into my research as well. And what I wanted to find out when I started researching this area is, what do people really struggle with? If we're going to support people with the retirement transition, we need to understand kind of the common adjustments and challenges that people face so that we can help them prepare better. So after reviewing the available research on retirement adjustment, I pulled out the main themes that came up. And so there were various categories that came up, various themes. And then these were grouped into 4 broader categories, which included who you are, or identity-related adjustments, what you do, which is about activities and daily pursuits, and who is involved, which is about your social relationships, your family, all of that, and then how you structure it, which is just about finding a new rhythm and routine to your daily life.
I think it's so crucial to just touch on them, because I think you've called them in the book the kind of the anchors of retirement well-being, which I think is really important. That the 4 things that you mentioned, who you are, what you do, who is involved, and how you structure it, are all about providing well-being on an ongoing basis in retirement. And as you said, people don't dedicate enough time to understand and prepare themselves for those 4 anchors or 4 pillars. Because as you said, I think people just think it's going to be, I'll leave work and then I'll do something else. But there's so much more to that transition that we need to consider. I'm really interested in the kind of who are you and what you do part, which I think is a lot to do with identity and how you, I think, communicate that identity with other people in your retirement. I think it's so in order to communicate that identity at the barbecue with somebody that you don't know, kind of that question, who are you? You need to obviously prepare for what your identity is going to be in retirement. So I'd be really interested to get your thoughts about that. How do we start to think about and tackle that part of the well-being journey?
I think you just hit on an important point and thinking about who am I becoming in retirement, right? And again, for some people, it might not feel like that big of a shift. For others, they can see that, wait a second, work is so important to me. And this is huge. Who am I without my job? And though that concern usually doesn't come up for people until maybe a year or two before retirement. Otherwise, some people will just kind of avoid retirement. They know that they enjoy their work and they're not really sure what they would do otherwise. So there are some different reactions to that. But yeah, once you're retired, how do you answer the question, what do you do? Right? So what you do is one way of letting people know a little bit about who you are as an individual. And at least in Western cultures, we tend to ask that question in order to kind of get a glimpse into who someone is when we're meeting them, right? So by understanding what you do for work, I get to know a little bit about the type of person that you are. So how do you answer that question when you're retired? This is an area where some retirees get a little bit tripped up. And yeah, going into retirement, you can kind of start to prepare by developing a clearer plan for what you think you're going to do, but also a plan for answering those questions. And I think it's about kind of having confidence in those plans and coming up with plans that really align with who you are as an individual. So it's going back to reflecting on your core values, your personality. Again, kind of like my work in finding the right fit between the individual and the job. Your job in retirement is to find the right fit between who you are and your retirement lifestyle, right? But you now are in charge of creating that lifestyle. So there isn't a set job and job description that you're applying for. Now you're in charge of actually creating that job description and figuring out what that looks like. So if you can design one that really feels authentic to you, like it reflects core aspects of who you are, that's where you're going to thrive and be able to communicate to other people, this is who I am. I think another piece of this is kind of thinking about our answers in general to that question, what do you do? If you try to answer that question without referencing your job, what does that sound like? And does that accurately reflect who you are as an individual, your personal characteristics? So you can kind of play around with responses to that ahead of time, right?
And I think that's really crucial, isn't it? Because I think, I've seen it with people that try and tackle that question or tackle that challenge once they're retired. And I think it's increasingly more difficult when you're in retirement or you're trying to find a purpose to actually answer that. I think the experiences I've had with people where it's been hugely successful is when that they have done the work prior to leaving behind a career. They kind of know what they're retiring to. They're thinking about what their purpose is going to be, and they're thinking about the identity that they want to have in retirement. And you can have multiple identities, right? You don't have to go into something. You can have, the music club host and the granddad or grandma, or you can have different identities that, the aspiring golf professional or whatever you want to be in retirement. I think that's crucial. If you can prepare for that, that allows you more mental space to be able to embrace that going forward.
It's the confidence in that response, right?
Absolutely,
And feeling like, yeah, this is what I'm doing, and this is who I am, and this really reflects who I am as an individual.
So, I'm really interested in the emotional side of things, and particularly when it comes to the emotion of being underwhelmed, which I think is actually an interesting emotion, because I think we feel like we've put a lot of planning into, or people I certainly come across and work with, they put some thought and planning into it. But the emotion that they don't plan for is being underwhelmed, because I think, there is a disparity about how you feel about your retirement and how others feel about your retirement. And sometimes that provides us with a bit of a reality check and can be quite underwhelming. And I know you've done some work and thought, and you've got some thoughts on that.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think that this is the big problem with retirement, right? So what do you do? How are you going to meaningfully fill your time? And if I understand it correctly, you're saying that some people, they prepare well for retirement and feel underwhelmed with it. And perhaps that's putting it lightly, right? There might be some people who really just dislike it and have a difficult time with it. And that's quite common as well. So not everyone goes through this, but yeah, there's a tendency to have sort of a honeymoon phase that people go through, and they really enjoy things like travel or fixing up the house. And, it's a little bit of a vacation, that break from work that you're always wanting and needing. But the novelty of that wears off. You finish some of the projects, you do some of the traveling, and now what? How are you meaningfully going to fill that time? I think that, the assumption that many people have is that you are going to just enjoy having all of this free time, right? Who doesn't want a little bit more free time when you're having to work all of the time and we're so strapped for time? So yeah, I think that it can be an unexpected experience. And it's something that most people don't really anticipate happening. So the people who haven't retired yet may not understand why that would be difficult, why retirement would be challenging. And so for some retirees, who do you turn to talk to about that? Does your family understand that actually retirement isn't turning out to be quite what you expected it to be, or it's just not that exciting at the moment, right? It's part of the adjustment period. So you have the initial excitement, and then you may experience some disappointment, and then you make some adjustments to your lifestyle and figure out something that works better for you, right? Now, with more planning around the lifestyle side of things and the social, psychological side of things, then I think we can avoid that period of disenchantment that people tend to go through, right? So it's not a necessary part of the transition. I think that there's a lot that we can do to help smooth out the transition. So you go from more of a honeymoon phase to, okay, what are my longer term plans that I'm moving into with retirement? And for me, with my background in industrial psychology, part of that means looking at, what does work provide for us? How does work engage us and inspire us? And what is it about work? What are the structures that support our well-being? And how can we bring those into retirement as well, right? So maybe there are certain tasks or projects that you really enjoy at work, and maybe you lose yourself in your work sometimes. Those experiences are really important, and we want to kind of look for ways to not necessarily replicate in retirement, but find new avenues for those same experiences, right? Of course, some people will choose to work part-time in their retirement as part of their retirement, and that's great. You can find the bits of work that you really enjoy doing and that you find engaging. And just working 1 or 2 days a week might be enough to fulfill you in that way, to provide that satisfaction. But oftentimes, there are things like not having enough opportunities for problem solving in retirement that can become part of the challenge. And again, just the general feeling of being underwhelmed or disappointed with retirement, I think we can go back to the anchors of retirement well-being and kind of look at these are the areas that tend to cause some bumps in the road for retirement.
It's an area that we touched on it a little bit earlier on in the conversation, but I do an exercise with people where I look at what I call retire to and retire from. So, you look at what they're retiring from and what they're going to miss and what they can't wait to get away from, and then look at what they're going to retire to. So what they're really looking forward to, but also what they're anxious about when it comes to what they're retiring to. And I know you've got a wonderful exercise, the push and pull exercise that you've got in your book, where you kind of say, well, what's pushing you towards retirement and pulling you away from work, and what's pushing you towards continuing work and pulling away from retiring. And I think it's a wonderful framework. I'd love you just to touch on that a bit, because I think it's that preparation, as we've said before, is so crucial to be able to feeling like you understand all of the wonderful non-financial things that work gives you, that give you an identity for so many years, and now you're going to pull the plug on it.
Right. Yeah. And this reminds me of the work by William Bridges, which is, kind of the well-known transitions model, where every transition starts with an ending phase, and then there's a neutral zone where you're sort of figuring things out, and then there's the new beginning, right? But the neutral zone is sort of this messy middle. And I think that goes back to your previous question, about being underwhelmed, but there can be this kind of phase where you're just figuring things out, right? But the endings phase is really important to, again, look at what you're leaving behind. What are you closing the door on when you retire, and acknowledging that before you move on to the next phase in the transition, so that those things aren't bubbling up later and becoming sources of disappointment or letdown, because you suddenly realize, oh my gosh, these things were so important to me at work, and I maybe overlooked them because I was so much looking forward to the travel and relaxation and all of those benefits to retirement, which are still really valid, really important benefits to retirement, right? But the push and pull exercise, that can be really useful when someone is struggling with the decision to retire. So, but it's just kind of becoming aware of the different factors or the different circumstances that have you feeling like, yes, I'm ready to retire, I can't wait to retire, and the things that are holding you back and saying, oh, I don't know if I'm quite ready to let go of work, right? And it's so important to get clear on those things and understand what's pulling you toward work or making it difficult for you to let go of work, right? And then also the things that might be pushing you to retire, perhaps a little bit sooner than you're really feeling ready otherwise. I think that you outlined it fairly well, but basically the exercise is to maybe jot down the things that you feel are pulling you toward retirement, that you're looking forward to, and then the things that are pushing you toward retirement. Maybe it's an early retirement package, or Maybe it's something to do with health circumstances or caregiving responsibilities, those factors that kind of nudge you toward retirement. Or, when it's gentle, sometimes those factors are not so gentle and you really just get pushed into retirement. And then the things that are pulling you toward work. So again, those things that prevent you from letting go of work. You're really attracted to certain things about your work or connected with them. You enjoy them. And the things that are pushing you toward work, which would probably mostly be finances, maybe health benefits, but it can also be something like not letting someone down, making sure that you have a replacement set up for you before you retire. So there might be other sort of commitments that you feel that are pushing you toward continuing work. So.
That's really, I've retired or helped people retire, or helped lots of people retire, and there is a real common thread, particularly with people that have had long and successful careers in, one or maybe even just two companies, that there is this, I need to hand this thing over in a good state. I've, invested a lot of time, energy, into building up this department or building up a particular, process or heading up a certain department. And now I feel like I want to hand this thing over in the best shape. And as and that's a really cool attitude to have. However, on a lot of occasions, when they start that process, they realize that maybe, their work don't care as much as they do. And I've had people actually end up retiring earlier than they thought they were going to, having had this program put in place to hand over. But that handover journey was not particularly well executed by the employer, because they now know that they're leaving and all of this stuff. So it's a really interesting phase. And I think people absolutely want to hand things over because they've invested blood, sweat, tears and time and energy into it. But I think there has to be a realization that actually, as we said before, that, people don't often care as much about your retirement as you do. And I think that's really important to understand.
Yes, yeah, that's that's a tough one, right? We come up to the retirement event and realize that maybe some colleagues are not that fazed by it, or your employer is not that fazed by it. I just, heard about a situation last week with someone who really seems to be a vital part of their organization. But they had some clashes with their manager, and they sent in their resignation and heard nothing back, just not a peep. And, they had worked for the same employer for many years. And so, this can be a really difficult part of the transition. And it may be in the pre-retirement phase that you start to realize you're trying to put things into place that maybe your employer doesn't seem to care about. Or it might be after the fact. It seems like you retire one day and everyone just kind of moves on without you very quickly, and as if nothing ever happened. It's just a difficult reality to face. And I think that part of it is just the requirement. Things need to move on without you, right? When you retire. And, but this retirement event is also just very emotional, so preparing for that phase of, having the difficulty and letting go, and understanding that your colleagues and coworkers are looking at retirement as something that they wish they could do, right? They wish they could retire. And so they might not understand that maybe you have some mixed emotions about it, or this is a more difficult transition.
Yeah, it's really, it kind of fits nicely into where I want to go next, actually. I mean, one of those pillars or anchors of retirement wellbeing is who is involved. And, I think it everything we've talked about goes into what I think you framed as kind of contacts, or when your contacts go. So when the known communication that you've had in your career slows or stops, emails and calls and chats and other conversations and meetings and structure, when that communication slows or stops, you then realize that actually the relationships that you've had, meaningful relationships you've had, are taken away or slowly drift away. And therefore, it's a really tough emotional time to understand how to replace that. I think it's also pretty tough that you're going to enter into a very different relationship with your spouse or partner at that point as well. So you talk a lot about building other relationships before you retire in the book, social and family and other, and I think that's really, really important, isn't it? Really important.
Yes, absolutely. Because a lot of people get caught off guard by how people move on without you. And you may have everyone sort of knocking on your door when you're at work, but then that communication can stop pretty quickly once you retire. And there's often an expectation that interactions with colleagues will continue in retirement, but generally speaking, they fade for most retirees. And I think that, well, probably that's because the common ground is no longer there, right? And especially the further you are, the longer that you're retired, then the less common ground there is with those former colleagues. Now, there may be some relationships that you have developed over time that do continue, but I think we want to try not to rely on staying in touch with former colleagues for our social lives, right? You want to start looking other places to develop new connections and to form some strong social networks outside of work, right? And the sooner that you can start doing that, the better. I think for most of us, we tend to rely on the workplace for our social interactions. We don't spend much time outside of work meeting with people and going to events or joining groups outside of work. And so it might take a little bit of a push for us to say, okay, let's go and start joining some groups. But if you have those set up before you retire, then it's already there and ready for you once you get to retirement, right? And also, back to the point about just the retirement event, because it can feel pretty emotional, right? When colleagues don't seem as fazed by your retirement as you might hope they would be. You can prepare for that in some ways by just thinking about what you want that transition to work, out of work, to actually look like. And that might include your retirement party, right? If you're going to celebrate retirement in some way, is that going to be a big party or big celebration? Or do you want it to be, a small dinner with some family and friends? And start to kind of prepare for that yourself and plan for it, because unfortunately, what we expect from employers is not always what tends to happen.
So true, and I've seen it firsthand in a number of circumstances. And I know you got some case studies in the book that go into about that stuff. So, and one final thing before we start to wrap up, I think I mentioned the transition between spouses and partners, and there was some research in the book, and you comment on, I think, something that I found hugely interesting, and it instantly took me back into several meetings I've had with couples, and this assumption that you're both on the same road, that you've not really talked about what the journey looks like, because typically the dominant spouse is just assuming that the non-dominant spouse is going to shares the same views. And I think in every situation I've ever been in where I've opened the conversation up to both spouses, it's very, very quickly realized that simply isn't the case. And they've never had this conversation in 20, 30 years of marriage. And I know there's some interesting research about this out there, isn't there?
Yeah. It's kind of surprising how many couples do not sit down and clarify their expectations for retirement with one another, right? So after so many years together, maybe you just sort of assume that you both have the same ideas about retirement. But I think especially just clarifying expectations about day-to-day life and what that's going to look like. But even things like where you're going to live maybe haven't been clarified, and just how you want to spend your time. One person might imagine that I'm going to retire and we're going to travel, and their partner is thinking, maybe I've done enough travel with work and I'm not that interested in it. So there can be some surprising assumptions between partners about their retirement. So I think just making sure to take time to discuss those visions that you have and the plans that you have, but also the expectations and concerns, right? What do you expect from your partner once they retire or once you retire? How is it different from things now when one or both of you are still working, right? There can be expectations around household responsibilities and how you're going to spend time together versus doing things separately. So, yeah, that's an important point.
Absolutely. And I think outside of everything, outside of the numbers, so to speak, but I think it's one of the biggest things that gets talked about through the work that we do with couples on an ongoing basis. It's that, you give us the platform to have that conversation that we never knew we needed to have, number one, or we never knew how to have it. There isn't someone you go to have kind of retirement couples therapy as such. There's people out there that obviously specialize in that, but it's not well known. And, the ongoing feedback that we get is it feels a bit like, marriage therapy or marriage counselling in a positive way, and you've brought together a shared vision. And so I think it's really, really important that you have someone, or if you have the ability together as a couple to go to sit down and have a conversation that has some objectivity to it, that you don't want to kind of feel like you're in each other's bubble. And I know that's some of the biggest value that we've added to the couples that we deal with, to give them an ability to have, I think, three things: an individual values and journey, and a shared one. So I think, it doesn't all have to be together, right? I think that's crucial.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think that it's important for each person to develop their own vision for retirement and their own plans, and then come together with their partner and see how that aligns with their partner's vision, right? And then that might mean modifying your vision so that you can, adjust for what your partner has in mind. But, the important point in looking at the four anchors of retirement well-being is to really design a retirement that aligns with who you are as an individual, right? So, of course, you as an individual, you might also be in a relationship with a partner. So that means, looking at your own personal values and your personality and what makes you thrive and leaves you feeling engaged, but then also honoring the relationship and your partner and your partner's needs, right? So, of course, there's a balance there, but in terms of figuring out what your retirement lifestyle is going to look like, I think it's always helpful to kind of start within, start with yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, could not agree more. Before we go into the last little bit of this episode, and I ask you some questions that I'm asking everybody, I do just want to say that I highly encourage all of the listeners to go and buy Polly's book. It is absolutely phenomenal. A link to the book will be in the show notes. But, it's full of brilliant and thoughtful research with, I think, really relatable case studies that are there, and actionable, reflective questions that I got so much out of reading it, and so much understanding about the process that people go through in their thoughts. So it's a hugely valuable resource for those initial retirement thoughts. And I said the link could be in the show. So highly, highly recommend that book, and well done for writing something so great. So I'm really interested just to hear your thoughts on three questions, if I may. So What will your retirement look like?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I'm still a few years off from my own retirement. Let's see. And this is maybe why I started studying this area, because when I interviewed pre-retirees who were unsure about retirement, I thought, oh my gosh, I really love my work too. What will I do, when it comes to time to retire? So for me, I think writing is always going to be important. And research, I love doing research. But that's holding on to the aspects of work that I find really engaging and that I enjoy. But those are things that I know that I can also continue, when I retire. But also, I think it's kind of the typical things, being able to, travel. You're challenging me here. I haven't prepared that well.
So I really do think that first part was crucial, though, wasn't it? I think it's, you find the things that you love and you continue to do those things that you love, no matter what age you are. I think that's kind of what I think most, to me, what a modern made up retirement thing looks like. It's, you find those things you love. So that's the crucial takeaway from that for me. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll save you. Don't worry. It's fine. So I'm 55. I'm sitting across the table from you. I've established the whole money thing is taken care of, right? I have enough. It's fine. What would be your number one tip for a happy and healthy and wealthy defined as in more than money, retirement?
Again, I think it's probably finding something that really aligns with a core part of who you are, that you find engaging, inspiring, something that you lose yourself in. I think having something that you can become really engaged in retirement would probably be my number one piece of advice.
I love that phrase, lose yourself in. We kind of often lose ourselves in things when in our 30s, 20s, 30s and 40s, whether they're social or work. I think it's important to lose yourself in something and be engaged in something post that, isn't it? That's really cool. Absolutely fantastic. So when it comes to the human versus retirement face-off, is there anything that I've not asked that I should have?
I think we covered a lot of ground today. I think
we've done super well.
Yeah. Nothing that comes to mind at the moment, but there are so many different situations out there. So.
Absolutely. Unique for everybody. I think that's the key thing. You mentioned that in your book a lot, isn't it? Everyone is unique. Everyone is individual. There is no cookie cutter kind of one-off plan approach to this. We have to sit down and take in what's important to us and what's unique to us.
Yes, absolutely.
Polly, look, thank you so much for your time and wisdom. And I know it's been a tough couple of weeks for you, moving around a little bit with some home problems. So I really, really do appreciate you joining me today. And thank you for listening in to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with me. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Subscribe to be notified when new episodes become available. We would love to have you along for the journey. If you like what you heard, then we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to leave us a review. And lastly, if you want to explore your retirement plans further, download our free 7-step retirement GPS toolkit linked in the show notes. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of TFP or Dan Haylett. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, so please always seek the advice of professionals with any questions you may have regarding your retirement.